Слава Україні!
Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that you're all having a great day. I hope you're having a lovely Friday. It's officially the weekend, and I hope that you are safe, that your family is safe, and of course that your friends are safe. And if they're not, I really do hope that they find that safety and security that they need. And obviously we have plenty of news going on today. A little bit quiet there in Ukraine itself, but that's not to worry. There's plenty of news going on all around the world, including stuff that has Ukraine involved, for those that are here for that. And we do have a lot of international news today, a lot of stuff dealing with ISIS and militants and stuff going on in Israel. But check out the description below, because a lot of these places have very significant humanitarian needs. These places require a lot of humanitarian aid and fundraisers and donations. We have plenty of links in the description to help out a lot of places around the world. We want to help millions of people, and we can only do that with your support here in this community. And so please check out the description below. There's plenty of stuff for Ukraine. We have vetted all of these foundations to make sure that 80% or more of your donations do actually go to their programs. So that way it's not just going towards someone's salary. So please check out those different donation links. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into the news here. And the first thing we have is here in Kyiv, and that's because the Ukrainian government has actually released a website that allows Russian families to find their soldiers in Ukraine. They're finding their sons and well, really their sons. They're in Ukraine. But let's go ahead and we can jump over here and check this out. And here it is. So you can actually find where different personnel are at in the country of Ukraine and what's going on here. So they have the lists here. There's 4,077 pages of them. So that's a lot of people. And so check it out if you want to see kind of what's going on and just how many people they have. There's a lot of prisoners of war, and I honestly don't know where Ukraine is even keeping them all at this point. But I'm sure that is for good reason. But that doesn't mean that only adds to the fact that Russian forces are pretty demoralized. And as we can see here in the Kharkiv Oblast, we can actually see that Russian troops are stuck at the border in the Kharkiv Oblast. So Ukrainian forces have pushed within just mere kilometers of the Russian border in some places here in Kharkiv, as their counteroffensive continues to just kind of steamroll the Russians. And we see that here, where Russian soldiers, they're actually complaining of the fact that they're stuck on the border, and they're saying they're forbidden to retreat under threat of prison or execution for deserting, and their command refuses to talk to them, and they've been camping there on the border for the last 2 days. So I can imagine that they're probably frustrated. They've already lost a bunch of guys. They're on the back foot, and this has got to be just demoralizing mentally. So let's check this out. So as we can see, they're just out there and they're just camping. They're just checking it out, what's going on. And obviously they're frustrated. I mean, they're losing. They did not get the welcome they expected to start with. They got their butts kicked by the Ukrainian troops. They're on the retreat. They can't retreat. Not one step backward seems to be implemented once again. Something that you wouldn't think of hearing since, Stalingrad or Leningrad or, the mass Soviet hordes of World War II. Not one step back. That was a policy they had, and it seems like they are semi-implementing it here. And as we jump down here to Kramatorsk, there's been a ban of alcohol in Kramatorsk. So part of this is because there is now stories coming out, and we have someone personally that was able to tell us this and relay this to us, who said that alcohol was being used excessively in Mariupol. I mean, because it was so bad, and trust me, you want to drink after some of this kind of stuff, that men were going out and they were drinking to the point that they just passed out. They just lost consciousness in order to cope with the horrific reality of what was happening around them. And seeing as Kramatorsk is so close to the front line, they want their citizens to be alert. So they banned alcohol in Kramatorsk completely. So that way people can't go in and, go out and buy it and get drunk while a war is going on right next to them. So let's take a look.
В этот раз не хватит. Вас предупреждали, мы его говорили.
So there you go. If you wanted to drink, well, you missed your chance. And up here in Rubizne, we have even more looting. And it's unsurprisingly by the Chechens, of course. The Chechens got to a hospital, and it's one of the most modernized hospitals inside of Ukraine. Specifically, it's a disease control location, and it was actually modernized by Japan and the rest of the UN in order to bring this up into the 21st century. And they are saying, yeah, we're going to open the hospital right here. Actually, we have images where all this stuff is getting shipped back to Russia. So here's their propaganda video.
В городе Рубежное не было ни света, ни газа, ни воды, ну и не было ни одного учреждения, которое могло бы оказать профильную помощь. Было указание главы Чеченской Республики Рамзана Ахматовича Кадырова. Запущена первая больница, полностью которая обеспечена всеми лекарственными препаратами, водоснабжение, газоснабжение, электроснабжение. Эти все вопросы, они взяты на контроль. С нашей стороны, чем мы можем помочь, мы все делаем. До тех пор, пока работа не будет поставлена должным образом на государственном уровне, обеспечение этих больниц.
Yeah, no, they're not. In fact, just take a look at see, emptied it all out. See that? That's where it looked like when they got there. That's what it looked like after they left. They took everything. All of the equipment. Yep, it's being shipped back to Russia and Chechnya right now. All of it. So, yeah, I mean, what else are you going to say to that? I mean, it's not unsurprising. The washer and dryer, from my understanding, could maybe be useful for them, as apparently Russian tanks and equipment, they've run out of actually military equipment, so they're using appliance pieces from the civilian sector as a stopgap. I've heard that today, and now everyone, hey, there's a possibility that it might be, they might use the washing machines to repair their tanks, apparently. But as we drop down here into Mariupol, things aren't as comedic, or at least not as, there's not really a whole lot of dark comedy you could really make about Mariupol. It's just too significant of a tragedy. Dark comedy survives in a lot of places. Even in extreme tragedy, this place is not one of them. And the DNR is currently attempting to get utilities up and running, but they can't. They have destroyed Mariupol to the point they simply can't. Now, they did get a hospital up and running with electricity, at least, and some of their quote-unquote humanitarian shelters. And this is coming from Petro Andrushenko, who is the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. But they need clean water systems, and they need the sewage system to run together, but the pipes are busted and destroyed, and if one isn't working properly, the other one won't function properly, and therefore there isn't going to be a safe water supply in the entire city. And it's actually causing flooding in some areas as they're trying to get this thing up and running. So, however, more mass graves are being found via satellite footage, and we can see this once again here. A mass grave site in a local cemetery has increased from 200 meters to 340 meters in length, meaning they aren't just, finding more mass graves, they are increasing them. What they already have, they are really packing people in there. And we've seen videos of this. We saw just the number of body bags alone that were being required, that were unburied, let alone the countless graves that were being used. See, this is prior footage. This is from the 21st of April. This is from the 6th. So we know it's increasing. And what a lot of people are coming here to see, and that is the fact that Russia continues the assault on the Azovstal. But amidst all of this, there are possible negotiations currently ongoing to remove 38 of the severely wounded Ukrainian troops out of the Azovstal. They did officially say, the Azov Battalion said that these negotiations were underway. Whether or not they become fruitful or not, we will have to see. If Russia even maintains their end of the bargain, we will have to see. We know they've broken that before with such as humanitarian corridors. They even shelled while the UN was there trying to get people out. So it's definitely up in the air, but they still continue to bombard the area and try and push into the Azovstal. However, they are thus far unsuccessful. Take a look here. So you can actually see over here, forces trying to move here in the trying to move towards the Azovstal, push their way there. But it's just not going well. They aren't being very successful, if anything, that they're doing lately. They aren't able to push. They captured a couple of buildings. They immediately got pushed back out. And we can see right here is next to a residential area. I mean, the entire Azovstal is surrounded by a residential area, except the part that leads to the sea. But they're dropping really heavy munitions here. Once again, it has not fallen. I mean, they're bringing out everything they got: artillery guns, fighter aircraft. I mean, they're drones, the multi-rocket launch systems that they have. You can see them. They're trying to jump over the wall here in Mariupol. I can't imagine that went well. But we can see here where they're talking about possibly getting, where they're talking about getting out troops, but also the amount of losses that the Azov Battalion is saying that they have, given to the Russian side, and that is significant if true. He's saying that they have so far killed about 6,000 troops. And they've destroyed at least 78 tanks and 100 different units of armored vehicles. Which, in a war where Russia has supposedly lost upwards of 20,000, that means you can attribute a good quarter of their losses to just Mariupol, if it's true. Now, battlefield commanders have always overestimated what they've actually killed and destroyed by a significant amount. And in fact, studies after the Iraq War, as I have said before here on the channel, studies of battlefield commander battle damage assessments after engagements and after action reports all stated that the field commanders reported killing the Iraqi army 5 times over. So, whether that's true or not here, the third-party estimates on casualties are relatively, I'd say are probably more accurate. Ukraine is saying one thing, Russia is saying that they've lost another, and the true number is going to be somewhere married up right there in the middle, somewhere in between. It's going to be somewhere in between what Russia is saying they have lost and what Ukraine is saying that they have killed. And it may take decades for us to find out the true casualties of the war, or we may never truly know at all. There's still plenty of casualty estimate debates from World War II alone, just because there were so many people killed. And as we take a look here, once again, Ukraine is saying that they are starting that operation, that Turkey may attempt to or may assist in the operation. We just don't know any specifics. We don't know if it's actually a thing yet. We don't know for sure what the details are. We don't know if that's part of a prisoner swap as has been offered. We don't know if there's negotiations right now. Or we do know, we can say with good certainty that there are negotiations. We just don't know what the terms will be, what the time frame will be, if Turkey's involved, what their involvement may be. We just don't know. Likely it will only be the wounded, because only the wounded are protected underneath the Geneva Convention. The rest of them that are either walking wounded, or they are, meaning they're still capable of fighting, even though they are wounded, they're lightly wounded, and those that are not injured at all are considered combatants and are not protected under the Geneva Convention unless they were to surrender. And the Azov Battalion is pretty firm in their belief that if they were to surrender, they'd be executed anyway, so it's not happening anytime soon. We are not going to see a mass surrender in Mariupol, I don't think, because they're pretty sure, and I can understand where that ideology comes from, considering what we've seen the Russians already do, that they will be executed if they even did surrender. There is not going to be any quarter, because in the words of Russia themselves, they are coming to denazify Ukraine, and the Azov Battalion is probably the most central thing of what Russia could claim as being the Nazis, if anything, in Ukraine. So they will likely not be given any quarter. However, an interesting development here in the Black Sea is the fact that Russian submarines appear to have left. Now, keep in mind, this is it's not exactly they may have left. They could even be underway, considering they're submarines. Their entire purpose is to remain hidden. But they've all appeared to have at least left Sevastopol essentially overnight. And this comes at the same time as Estonia just confirmed that Ukraine will be receiving the Israeli Blue Spear anti-ship missile, which was approved by Israel. So that transfer was approved by them. And so that's big news, because if it's going to put Russian submarines at risk, their surface fleet is already at risk. They've been operating their submarines in the Black Sea in order to continue to conduct those cruise missile strikes. Now, if they get now if they're giving even better anti-ship missiles than what they already have, because the Neptune is a very good anti-ship missile, that puts the submarines at risk. They're not going to risk another warship. They've already lost one. How many more could they really afford to lose? You can write one off, even if it is the Moskva. You can't write off your nuclear-capable submarines. Just not happening. I'd say that's even more important than the Moskva ever would have been. And that is actually all of the news inside of Ukraine. But there is a pretty decent amount outside of Ukraine. And some of it is kind of hilarious. Some of it is very serious. We'll take a look here. So the first thing is the fact that Even Belarus is praising the Ukrainians at this point. Actually, we have the video here today. We did get it independently verified, where Lukashenko is actually kind of in awe of the Ukrainian ability to fight. He not just admires their ability to just stop Russia, but to actually beat back their forces, and says to his commanders, we should learn something from this. Which, as Putin's probably closest ally, probably isn't what you should be saying, but Lukashenko seems to be kind of a teeter-totter when it comes to what he's going to say. One minute he 100% backs Russia and he's mobilizing his forces. The other minute he's, talking about, well, I don't think Russia intended for it to be this long. I think Ukraine has a pretty good way of fighting warfare. And it starts praising Ukrainian troops. So he's kind of weird. He is a dictator, so he can kind of say whatever he wants, as long as it's not going to affect Putin at all. But, yeah, he's an interesting guy. Let's take a look.
Украины. Самые эффективные, в том числе со стороны украинских вооруженных сил, оказались мобильные группы, которые мгновенно, неожиданно, приближаясь к противнику, который гораздо их превосходит, наносят разительные удары. Особенно по тыловым скоплениям войск. 5 урок Украины.
Yeah, so he's just like, we could learn something from Ukraine. Which I think a lot of people will be. This is not a write-off. Even though it sounds funny now, military experts all over the world, every military on the planet right now, is currently looking at studying the war in Ukraine. Because this is the first time. Think about the last few wars that's happened for many of us in our lifetimes. Where have they been fought, and who have they been fought against? They have been fought against the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda, or the Iraqi army, which, while it was a large one, wasn't necessarily extremely modern, or powerful, or even well-trained. We've seen combat against terrorists and insurgents for the last, 20, 30 years. Not really two military powers with the full might of their industry and economy behind a war effort fight each other since really the end of World War II. We haven't. Everything in between then. Wars have been extremely controversial. Where did the fighting? Vietnam was against really the Vietnamese army, who was still technologically inferior, but the insurgency was very good. Proxy wars between Russia and the United States, whether you're talking about Korea, you're talking about Vietnam, you're talking about who did Russia fight in the 80s? It was the Mujahideen, which later became the Taliban. You haven't seen two world powers go to war against each other, two modern military powers, and this is the first time. And there are going to be a lot of lessons that everyone has to learn from this. Are tanks going by the way of the dinosaur? I don't think so. Tanks are another tool, just like anything else. They have a specific purpose that they work very well in. Russia's doctrine overuses them and not in a very good purpose. I do believe they're going to become more autonomous, because you can't continue tank crews need to be trained, and that's guys that have to be trained. It takes time, it takes money, and when you can have a machine do it, you can have something unmanned do it, and then whenever it's destroyed, you're not losing those people. Autonomous weapons, drone usage, heavily done on both sides. The necessity for high precision artillery weapons, light anti-tank weapons that can be carried by the infantry that are essentially undefeatable. How your tank is set up, so that way you're not seeing catastrophic destruction of the vehicles against those missiles. Action and counter, and action and reaction. The same way of the wars being fought with offensives and counteroffensives. The development of warfare since the first stone and stick has developed continually of action and reaction. And that is what we're going to see out of this for decades. This will be studied for decades from military commanders. These lessons, while painful, are necessary for the security of every nation in the world that has to learn from these lessons on the battlefield. So, once again, while it seems dumb now and funny, he's not wrong. And we're actually going to jump over here into Moscow today. And that is because, of all things Russia could have done, their state media showed a clip. It was a Bayraktar drone. So it's a Ukrainian drone that gave us this footage. We saw it long before this. And this is what I was actually commenting about. This is the Ukrainian Air Force bombing Snake Island while they've been assaulting it with air power. The Bayraktar drone was lasing targets for them and observing. The Russian state media is claiming that this is the Russian Air Force bombing a Ukrainian position. Let's take a look.
Над островом Змеиный силы российской ПВО сегодня сбили очередной Байрактар. За последние дни там полегло 1,5 украинских самолетов и вертолетов и вдвое больше беспилотников. Это не говоря о погибших военных спецназа. Приказ о штурме такого масштаба, по данным российского Минобороны, отдал лично Зеленский. Опровергать эту версию в офисе украинского президента.
They are literally showing their young men being killed and claiming it is the Ukrainians who are dying here. What do you? I don't know how you get away with this. I guess if you have control of every media station inside the country, then, I mean, you could, in theory, if people weren't, not stupid. But they are. They aren't stupid. They are very, very smart. People use VPNs. People don't update their phones so that way that the government doesn't take control of these things. There are probably paranoid doomsday preppers in Russia, just like there are in other places of the world. People aren't stupid. People don't just inherently trust their government and everything it's doing. Not even me, and I've worked for the government. I mean, there's free will. No matter where humans have free will, you can't just take that away from them, no matter how much you do. And anybody who remembers anything from the beginning of the war, I can't imagine that Snake Island, which has been shown on the news before, isn't still in the minds of any Russians, because I'm sure this was labeled as a victory of some kind early on in the war. That's not the only thing. The Duma at this point, which is basically the parliament for Russia, is saying that Poland is next. They straight up are saying that today. And let's just go ahead. We have the actual article here. This is the Russian. I'm going to translate it here for you. We had it independently translated too to make sure that what's being said is correct. And this is talking about... This is literally talking about denazifying Poland. By their statements about Russia as a cancerous tumor and about the indemnity, we have to pay Ukraine. Poland encourages us to put it in the first place in the queue for denazification of Ukraine. This is coming from the State Committee on, or the State Duma Committee on Control, Oleg Morozov. What do you? This is the government. What do you? How can you? You can't just say this. I mean, everyone's already kind of afraid. Like, for decades, the world has been afraid of Europe and the world being taken over by the Reds, right? Like, the Soviet Union was the boogeyman for the entire history of the 20th century. Think about it. Hitler hated the Bolsheviks as much as he hated Jews. Like, That was it. Like, his fear, should there have been no Soviet Union, really, there probably wouldn't have been a Hitler and the Third Reich, because the threat of Russia and the Soviet Union was just as much of a threat and to scare anybody in Germany as it is now for anybody in the Western world. Realistically, Japan didn't surrender because we dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. It didn't help, but really, in the wide scale of things, there's not a whole lot of a difference between using 1 bomb that destroys a city or using 1,000 bombs that destroy the city. The city is destroyed regardless. I mean, just think, the firebombings of Tokyo. However, it just coincidentally coincides that the atomic bombs were dropped by the United States on Japan at the same time Russia declared war, and the threat of Russia far outweighed the atomic bombs. So Japan surrendered because they have a divine, leader who is the Emperor of Japan. This very thing that Russia does not like, or at least the Soviet Union did not like. A divine leader in charge. Not a thing for the Soviet Union, so surrenders to the Americans instead. So we're going to take Poland next and denazify Poland. First of all, Poland, the Poles are like the second largest group of people executed during the Holocaust after the Jewish people. The Poles saw it the worst next. So you're not exactly, much like Ukraine, you're not really denazifying anything. And secondly, that's also a NATO country, which brings you into direct war with the West, who is very quickly going to be 32 nations that want to throat stomp you instead of 30. So the ideology here just blows my mind. And for whatever reason, the fires continue in Russia as yet another historic building, at least now, has caught fire in Irkutsk. We don't know what the cause of the fire. We don't know if there's any casualties or anything. We just know it's on fire. But this is becoming a very common occurrence in Russia. And despite everything going on, Russia wants to really solidify its holdings. And that is the theme in Ukraine right now, as many of these places are going to hold referendums here soon, such as the Kherson Oblast. They're going to hold false referendums, but referendums nonetheless. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if Belarus joined Russia, considering they're basically occupied by them. But the South Ossetia region of Georgia, which was invaded in 2008 by Russia, is saying that they were going to hold a referendum to join the Russian Federation on July the 17th. So this is not a good set of news. This is saying this part of a sovereign independent nation is going to join the Russian Federation. This part of this sovereign nation is under Russian occupation. So what is stopping Transnistria, which is also a breakaway region in a sovereign nation, or any of the other regions? There's not really anything to stop them. If they are under Russian occupation, such as South Ossetia is, there really isn't anything that anyone can do unless there is a much larger scale war. So I had a question come in from Aravish Chiang, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, who said, what is their gain in these denazification? It's not really denazification. And that's the thing. Just Hitler had his own plans, right, during World War II. He had his own reasons. It wasn't because of the Jews or because, well, it probably was because of the Jews, but he probably just hated them to hate them. He was just anti-Semitic as a person. But the Bolsheviks or any of this stuff was used to conjure up fear, was used to conjure up support. Everything you have to think about when it comes to a war, or when it comes especially to the war of information, you hear a lot in these days about misinformation, false news, fake news, whatever you want to call it, propaganda. And this isn't a new concept. This is something I actually wrote about and posted on our Discord, but I'll reiterate the basics here. You really need, when you're looking for news, you really need to think about what is being said and who does it benefit. Because everything is about either generating a narrative to garner support, or it's in order to undercut someone else's narrative so that way they lose support. That is a constant battle going on. And what Russia is trying to do is continue to garner support for a continual escalation of conflict. We do know Russia isn't backing down. And in order to keep these people in order to keep the Russian people, content, I wouldn't say happy, but content with what's going on as the bodies continue to return home to Russia and maybe even prep for a general mobilization at some point, then Russia has to give them a reason to continue fighting, false or not. And you gotta think what the victory is called. What is World War II called for Russia? The Great Patriotic War. It was the Great Patriotic War of the Soviet Union. It's a harken back to history that generates support. We fought the Nazis and we beat them the first time. Now the Nazis have returned, and Russia, with its power and might, needs to beat the Nazis again. That and wipe them from the face of the earth. Regardless of whether or not that's the purpose, doesn't matter. What they do to do that doesn't matter, because what did the Nazis do to... Russia lost the Soviet Union, because it wasn't just Russia. The Soviet Union lost the best averages have about between 20 and 26 million people during World War II. That estimate goes as high as 80 million people. There is not a single person in the Soviet Union that wasn't affected by the Soviet Union during World War II. So every single person in Russia has a connection to denazification, to the victory of the Great Patriotic War. And once again, everyone also, at least if you are old enough to remember, which is at this point 30 years ago, but the Soviet Union, people's parents and grandparents remember the Soviet Union and the threats of the West, why NATO existed in the first place. And then after the Soviet Union collapsed, the terrible economic depression that really the West didn't help with, because there was definitely a hard period of change before the Putin's rise to power. So being able to connect with the people on that single thing maintains support on top of the fact that he has control of everything else. It doesn't matter what his reasoning is. There is no actual gains. The gain is a legacy. Putin needs a legacy. He's old now. He needs to have a legacy, because whether or not he has, cancer or whatever other rumor you want to input there, he is old and he is inevitably going to die at some point. So you might as well go out with a legacy of being a glorious leader that brought back the Russian Federation to the forefront, that was able to be military successful, bring back the homelands, free and liberate the Russian-speaking people of the world from the Western Nazis or whatever else you want to call them. Whether or not it's true that anyone's Nazis doesn't matter. The word has meaning. It's just like if in the 50s you were to call anyone a communist in the United States. Wouldn't go very well for anyone called a communist. So that is the purpose. The gains of denazification don't matter. What matters is he wants this region anyway. Poland was under the USSR. He wants these regions back. And we know that he doesn't just want these regions back. He wants not just the Soviet Union back. He wants the Russian Empire back. Just look at his villas. They have the crest of the Russian Empire. The Tsar, not the crest of the USSR. Despite being a very, very well or a very successful KGB officer. And here in Latvia, we actually see why he uses these kinds of terms, and that's because he's talking about Latvia's they are so done with Russia that they're actually phasing out the Russian language from their school curriculum by 2025. And there is a huge Russian-speaking population. 37.5% of people in Latvia speak Russian natively. 43.7% people speak it as a second language. These places have very deep ties to Russia and to the Soviet Union, and therefore, this is the kind of thing that they're like, okay, we are not going to be associated with that crap anymore. And that is coming from a lot of places here. You see the major shifts. So, and you're seeing protests to this, of course, considering there are a lot of Russian speakers. But it doesn't mean that that's going to change. But you're seeing major shifts politically. You're seeing people completely isolate and disown Russia for what's going on inside of Ukraine. And we see here where the G7, which is the 7th largest global economies in the world, that is what the G7 is. They are going to be giving Ukraine an additional $30 billion worth, this is the US dollars worth, of financial aid to Ukraine as the conflict continues. Alongside that, the representative for Ukraine, who is there as a guest, actually stated that Russia would rather war than negotiations. And this is coming as Russia is also saying that Ukraine would rather war than negotiations. So it's kind of a back and forth between the two of them, understandably. I probably wouldn't want to talk to the guy invading my country either. But the thought process for the rest of the Western world is kind of, you can't blame that guy for not wanting to talk to you while invading his country. You can't beat him up and say, why aren't you talking to me? It just doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? But on top of that as well, they're also petitioning the Taliban to lift those restrictions that they've recently put on women, including forcing them to wear, once again, the hijab, which is specifically something they said they wouldn't be doing. The Taliban had said when they took over Afghanistan and remade the caliphate that they were going to be different this time. This is not going to be the 90s all over again. It's the 90s all over again. They're slowly but surely rolling back into that as now the world has shifted away from what's going on in Afghanistan to what is happening in Ukraine. And we have a couple of different things here regarding that. So there are the largest economies in the world, and you have there Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So that is the G7. And of course, they had plenty of other people there too. It wasn't just those nations. Different speakers from around the world also came here during the G7 summit to kind of talk about what's been going on. However, the main focus this year, of course, was Ukraine. So that is kind of what's going on. And they have said that they will be supporting Ukraine until victory. So that is kind of what's going on here with the G7 meeting today there in Germany. The United Kingdom, however, has sanctioned Putin's family. In fact, 11 individuals were sanctioned today by the United Kingdom in Russia, and that includes Putin's girlfriend and ex-wife and other relatives. So if you have any relation to this guy, you're probably going to end up sanctioned if the war continues. Just as a heads up, oligarchs are already sanctioned, but that's an entirely different story. But obviously, there is a lot of stuff happening in Europe on this day, and there's going to continue to be a lot happening in Europe as the war continues. However, as we move here into the Middle East, there has been some rather disturbing events that have happened lately. First of all, an Al Jazeera journalist named Shireen Abu Akleh was actually shot in the head and killed during a raid in the Jenin refugee camp there in the Gaza Strip. And She was killed, reportedly, according to her co-workers, by Israeli Defense Forces. There are investigations independently that both the Palestinians and the Israelis are working independently, conducting investigations. And there's a pretty big outcry by the international community because she and the other journalists, including several of whom were injured, were clearly labeled as being press. And they were backed into a corner and killed. And she was killed. But police began beating the crowd. The Israeli police there in Jerusalem began beating the crowd and throwing stun grenades at Palestinians that came out to support her and her family. And this was happening as the casket was being carried out. Not only while the casket was being carried out, the pallbearers almost lost complete control of the casket because of this. Thousands of Palestinians showed up for this in solidarity. And the security forces didn't want her procession to leave on foot from the French hospital and to become a walking demonstration, so they had a hearse take her body instead. But we've seen an immense amount of police brutality on this, and just take a look. They're all lined up and ready to go here, and just watch what happens.
إلى الكنيسة كليل الزهور. كما نرى صورة قمع مشهد يصعب وصفه. التابوت الآن
مشهد مؤلم بكل تأكيد على الهواء مباشرة. قوات الاحتلال نعم تعتدي على الشبان.
التابوت لم يبقى الآن قوات الاحتلال.
I mean, you saw them. They're lined out. They're waiting. Casket came out. They charged in there. They started beating the pallbearers. I mean, when is... You have to ask what's going on in the world in this day and age when you see these kind of images. This is a funeral. Granted, tensions aren't great between Israel and Palestine. They never have been. But you can't do these things, especially with the international scrutiny. Thousands of people showed up for her funeral and her procession there. And the beginning of that procession is really a tragedy, nonetheless. That's not the only thing Israel's been conducting. They conducted airstrikes in Syria, and apparently most of the incoming missiles were shot down by Syrian air defenses, according to the authorities there. But apparently 5 people were killed, 7 more, including children, were injured. And reportedly, the Israeli Air Force was targeting Tel Aviv militants in the area, in installations there in Syria. But we do have a couple bits coming out of here today on that. And here you can see those air defenses that work. Just like we've seen in Ukraine, these things are intercepting incoming ordnance and detonating them. So quite an interesting day today in Syria, because that's not the only thing that happened. In fact, a Syrian military bus was hit by a pro-Turkish militia anti-tank guided missile. Looks, from what I could tell, it could be a Russian anti-tank guided missile, but a lot of forces up here do have the TOW2, which is a American anti-tank missile system, and this ended up killing 12 soldiers and injuring an additional 14. So we do actually have the footage from the attack here. So that right there is the aftermath of this bus. As you can tell, not a whole lot left. Well, let's take a look at the strike itself. Gonna go ahead and mute that because it is copyright footage. But we can see the bus going down the road, and there goes the ATGM there. It appears to be wire guided. And it continues. This is a pretty long shot for an ATGM. But there it goes. That bus is just utterly destroyed. You got to think, this stuff is made to go through roughly a meter worth of armor. When an ATGM tandem warhead hits something. So a bus is it hitting a tin can, essentially. There isn't going to be a whole lot left of it when it's done. As we move over into Iraq here, we can see the clashes continue between government forces and, of course, the PKK militias there in Sinjar. And this is forcing the Yazidis, who are the local population there, to actually be fleeing the region and go to refugee camps at this point. So these people are having to leave their homes. Once again, it's another humanitarian crisis ongoing. There's enough wars going on. I mean, just think of the humanitarian crisis because of Syria. I mean, that civil war has been absolutely brutal. I definitely don't miss what was going on there from when I spent time there, let alone what's, continuing conflict here in Iraq, and, what else is going on throughout this entire region, Yemen, Lebanon. So definitely not a good time. This also comes in the midst as there is possible that we're possibly going to see famines. We're already seeing drought there in Iraq. So the situation definitely is not improving. The Islamic State, of course, which is still relevant in this region despite not having the caliphate anymore. That is in caliphate territory right there, for former caliphate territory. So there definitely are Islamic State cells still operating in this region too. There's also, you have coalition backings, you have coalition troops, you have the Iraqi army, you have the PKK, the Kurds, you have those border skirmishes, the SDF, and then you also have Iranian fighters too. In fact, when I was in Syria, there were reportedly 70,000 Iranian fighters in the country of Syria fighting on numerous sides. So the same thing is happening in Iraq. The Kataib Hezbollah is an Iranian-backed militia there in Iraq. And so there's a lot of power struggle and a lot of political turmoil, as well as terrorism, semi-civil war-like conditions there, conflicts, and on top of your normal humanitarian food, water insecurities, and of course security, as we're seeing here. Armenia today, up in Yerevan, the protests continue, and they are struggling for power, is what they are saying. The opposition party is continuing to, protest. Thousands of people are protesting because of the peace accords between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia is expected to basically take anything that Azerbaijan wants. Armenia is going to do it, and that is the concern for the opposition party. That's what the ruling party is hinting at doing, is to take those concessions. And this is not something a lot of people want in Armenia. And the police are becoming increasingly aggressive as these protests continue to grow and are not subsiding despite their rather brutal crackdown. So let's take a look.
Աղջկավելա չգորաս Չգորաս աղջկավելա, գորում ես
Oh,
Եվ պետական համակարգը այլևս չի սպասարկում այս ժողովրդի շահերը։
I mean, they're blocking government building entrances, blocking roadways. They are very upset. Very upset. There's been thousands of them. And as we drop down here into the UAE, there is some rather significant news, and that's because the president of the UAE, Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, actually ended up dying at the age of 73 today. So the Ministry of Presidential Affairs announced today that there would be 40 days of official mourning with flags at half-mast and 3 days of closure for the ministries for all official entities at all levels. And so the Vice President and Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, who is also the ruler of Dubai, is going to act as the president until the federal court actually goes and meets. All 7 emirates meet together to elect a new president. So a very unfortunate passing. The UAE has been has been seeing a lot of growth. It has been very engaged in the talks with what's been going on energy wise and trying to meet some of those needs for Europe as they look for less dependence on foreign energy in Russia, and has also sent several different aircraft loads worth of equipment over to Ukraine, including entirely stocked ambulances. So a supporter there in the Middle East. And that has also been reported there on Al Jazeera. And Turkmenistan, much like the Taliban themselves, followed very shortly suit, also imposing massive prohibitions on women. So fingernail and eyelash extensions are banned. Dyeing your hair, both at a salon or at home, is banned. Traveling in your car, you can only travel in the back seat if you are a woman, and you can only do that until 8 p.m. at night. And Botox has been banned and labeled as a poison, and many other things have been banned. Keep in mind, this is something, the Turkmenistan's government, the president basically has put all of his family and friends in power, so he can do essentially whatever he wants. And this is once again hearkening similarly where Afghanistan did very similar things. They put restrictions on women just a few days ago. Turkmenistan is following suit. And there he is. So, I mean, reportedly just having eyelash extensions is a 15-day prison sentence or a fine. So women's rights definitely being rolled back there in the nation of Turkmenistan. And as we talk about Afghanistan, an explosion has occurred in Kabul that has injured at least 3 people. They are at the Ayub Saber mosque. So apparently there was a possible IED inside of the mosque, but nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack. News out of Afghanistan is rather limited, simply because the Taliban maintains a crackdown on journalism inside of the country, so we do not have a lot of news coming out of there today. No further news out of Sri Lanka today, despite the country being in absolute chaos. That is partially attributed to the fact that Sri Lanka, all social media has been cut off. In North Korea, the COVID-19 cases rise exponentially. So they rose from the very first one, which was announced yesterday, to 18,000 cases in the course of a day. And this is of the Omicron virus variant, which is a variant of COVID-19 that is extremely transmissible. One of the major points of contention for North Korea is the fact that nobody in North Korea is vaccinated. So not only have they reportedly not have had COVID-19, so there hasn't been a natural immunity to it, at least officially. We have a hard time, the international community has a hard time believing that North Korea hasn't had a COVID-19 case. The country is relatively isolated, so it's not impossible. But 21 people are reportedly died to date of the virus, and with nobody being vaccinated, there's no type of immunity. If they haven't had it yet, and there's no natural immunity, and they don't have a vaccine, so there's no manufactured immunity to it, then there's just no immunity to it, and you have the worst variant you could have. It's the easiest to transmit between two people. So this is going to likely spread like wildfire. So that continues once again today. And here in Nigeria, the Islamic State actually attacked the central part of the region of Nigeria really for the first time today. Most of the time they've been so far located really to the eastern section of the country, over by like places such as Cameroon and Chad in the Borno region. But about 40 kilometers northwest of Abuja, which is the nation's capital, there was an attack by jihadists on the on a police station in the settlement of Salaja, and 3 security forces personnel were killed and a motorcycle were burned. And so at this point, that adds yet another state in Nigeria where the Islamic State are effectively operating, and this is being addressed. There's actually a coalition being formed there in Morocco, and at this point, representatives from the international coalition there in Morocco met today and recognized that ISIS, in the fight against ISIS as the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations continue worldwide, that Africa is the most serious front. It is the most dangerous sector because the Islamic State and other terror groups are rapidly expanding, garnering further support and escalating violence across the continent. And so they are currently trying to figure out how to best combat this. However, this doesn't mean that there wasn't any response to it by ISIS themselves, who through a media center released a video really to a message to the unbelievers of the West. And it was apparently filmed there in West Africa, as far as we can tell. And several fighters announced that the mouths of their intention to continue the battle to the bitter end, and that another killing of the leader had no effect on their resolve or morale. We've already seen this out of every terrorist organization in the world. As much as you can kill off people, it's extremely difficult to kill off an entire ideology. And unfortunately, extremism is going to always be a thing. It always has been a thing, and it always will be a thing. It's just modern weapons and modern equipment make those terror threats, those extremists, a lot more dangerous than they did some time ago. And we do have some photos of that message here. But, once again, while you can't kill the ideology, you certainly can kill terrorists, so that's a thing. And over in North America, here in Washington, D.C., the Secretary of Defense actually spoke with Russia. So, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu actually talked on the phone with Lloyd Austin, who is the Secretary of Defense. And it's the first phone call since the war actually began. And basically, once again, Lloyd Austin urged an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. But the Pentagon also came out with a couple of different statements thus far. So the U.S. believes that Russia and Ukraine are now in a full-fledged artillery battle, which is something that we have already been reporting on. The use of artillery is intimately linked with the war in the East. You thought you saw artillery on a grand scale before. It will be nothing like what is being seen on the Eastern Front right now, and the war is far from over. And Ukraine has received more than 20 of the Phoenix Ghost loiter drones. We really can't comment on that because the Pentagon aside from saying that they have them, hasn't released any information on what the Phoenix Ghost is, how it works, what it does, how big it is, how small it is, any of that. So we don't know. We don't know anything about it. Perfectly fine by me, because if I don't know about it, the Russians may not know about it and what it can do. We don't even truly know what the T-14 Armada is capable of doing. So, and that's a rather big and publicly displayed asset. The United States is also saying that 89 of the M777 systems are already forward deployed, meaning not only have they reached Ukraine and not only are they in the hands of the units in Ukraine, but they are on the front lines engaging enemy targets. They are forward deployed. They are on the battlefield engaging Russian forces. That is a lot of precision artillery fire that you're bringing to bear on Russian troops, because the M155, or sorry, the 155 millimeter M777 howitzer system can use things such as the Excalibur round, which is a precision guided munition for artillery pieces. You're not just talking about those grad systems of saturation artillery usage. You're talking about precision artillery strikes, which for an indirect fire weapon is a pretty important thing, because one round and it's going to knock out a tank, and instead of doing it from 2.5 kilometers away, you can do it from 20 kilometers away. John Kirby, who is the spokesperson for the Pentagon, stated that he urges the Senate to pass the Ukrainian aid packets, preferably before May 19th, to avoid interruptions in the flow of weapons to Ukrainian forces. So there has been an individual, he is the senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, who has he has kind of blocked that passage of that bill thus far. We will see if it continues into the future. But several different announcements, and this is coming through from Nexta for us. And finally, we're actually going to jump over here into Turkey. And you might have noticed the points in Turkey. I kind of jumped around it a little bit. But that's because we have two interesting developments today, both of them relatively related. We needed some good news today. And that is the fact that, first of all, a 2,300-year-old tomb was found in Istanbul. Not only was it 2,300 years old, it was a brick tomb that contains the cremated remains of the individual who is buried there. So while they were set on fire and cremated, they were only partially cremated. Their bones have survived. And so it's one of the oldest finds in the area, and it really tells us, one, about the burial rituals in the area and in the region, dating back 2,300 years, and it also kind of can allow us to see some insight as to what these people were like. You believe it or not, just from things such as bone structures, injuries, and the like, you can tell a lot by their diets, how much they weighed, their population, is it male or female, or was this person male or female, genetically, what was the life like? And that is what they're currently doing. So, very cool find indeed. And there you can see that ancient city there. And of course we got that from Live Science. But we also, from Live Science today, got the fact that there is an underground city in Mardin, Turkey that was discovered. And not only, but this city is so big, can house up to 70,000 people, and it was built almost 2,000 years ago. So this is probably would have been used by early Christians to escape the Roman persecution. And this is one of the first underground chamber complexes found in about 2 years. And so there's still a lot to go for. 49 chambers thus far have been unearthed, and more are certainly going to be followed, including connecting passages, water wells, grain storage rooms, silos, homes, places of worship, including a church. The Star of David is there on the wall, so it appears to be a Jewish synagogue as well. So there's a lot of stuff being found here in Turkey, and this is a rather historic find for kind of trying to piece together, especially if you are religious yourself. This is also a historic find to piece together some history there. But overall, I mean, 2,000-year-old underground complex. This isn't necessarily unusual for this region in the world. There are lots of underground complexes that have been found throughout, this part, Anatolia especially. But to find another one, especially such a large one, is extremely rare, and it's going to give a lot of insight to how these people lived 2,000 years ago and what their daily lives were like underground. And with that, that is actually all of the news of today. There was a ton of it, a ton of international stuff. Not necessarily as much out of Ukraine as we normally would like, but you can't... Usually, no news is generally good news, especially in Ukraine, because that usually means Ukrainian troops on the move and conducting this counteroffensive. So, a lot of interesting developments and a lot of stuff going on in the world that isn't necessarily all that great. There's a lot of tragedy, there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of humanitarian crises, which is why we want to help millions of people throughout the world through this stream and through these videos. And not only do we want to give the news itself in the best way we can, in the most independent way we can, but we also want to be able to help millions of people while doing this. And the only way we can do that is with community support. So please check out the description below and check out all of the different donation links that we have there. We have them for Ukraine, if that is where your heart is set currently, as many of the others here. Our heart is also there with Ukrainians. But we cannot forget the millions of other people who still need our help elsewhere. And this includes places such as the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Children under the age of 5 especially are impacted in the Horn of Africa due to malnutrition, water insecurities, as Somalia is going through a drought that 90% of the region is dry. And this also includes Southeast Asia, who, of course, got hit by Super Typhoon Rai and is currently undergoing recovery efforts. So while these continue, and as other crises become relevant throughout the world, we are going to continue to add links and continue vetting for links and locations. All of these links we're vetting, we're not only making sure that money goes where it needs to go, but that at least 80% or higher of those donations actually go to the organization. For instance, Brother's Brother, 99.6% of your donations go to the programs. So these kind of organizations, these aren't going to pay for salaries. They are going to help people. And likewise, check out our Discord. We also maintain these links on the Discord. We make announcements there, and there's a lot of people who talk about a lot of different regions of the world. It's not just Ukraine on there. You can talk about the international news as well. But a lot of people post a lot of good stuff on there. Some of it even makes it into the news. In fact, we had one last night that we actually beat out DW in reporting, as I found out today while I was watching that live. So, yeah, go check it out. There's a lot of good stuff posted there, and then you can always rack your brains. There's a lot of very intelligent and knowledgeable people there, so come check us out on our Discord. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's fine. I understand. Please give us a like and subscribe, because the more people we can reach and the more people that can come and watch our news, the more people that will also be around to donate to these wonderful organizations and help people globally. And the more we can change these people's lives for the better. And with that, my name is Paul from the New News. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Friday night, and hopefully you have a great Saturday. And I hope that you remain safe, that your family and friends remain safe. And if not, I hope they find that safety and security in the very near future. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Bye.